Welcome to this YSL Report Builder tutorial. In this part of the series, we'll look at how you can calculate the first, last and middle names from a full name column in a database. The video is all about then, of course, splitting a full name into its separate parts, and we'll begin by looking at how to get characters from the start of a string. We'll also explain how you can locate a specific character within a string, and that'll help us to calculate the first name. We'll show you how you can remove any extra spaces by trimming text, before we then move on to looking at locating characters at the end of a string, and then how you can get characters from somewhere in the middle of a string to help us get both the last and middle names. So by the end of the video, we'll have calculated columns for both first, last and middle names. Quite a few interesting techniques to use here. Let's get started. To get started, I've created a new report in Report Builder, and as usual, the first thing I'll do is create a connection to the YSL Movies database. Just as a quick reminder, if you don't already have it installed, you can use this video to help you get it set up, and you'll find a link in that video's description, which you can use to download any needed files. Assuming you've done that part already, I'll right-click my Data Sources folder and choose to add a data source. I'll call it Movies, as I usually do. Use an embedded connection pointing to a Microsoft SQL server, and I'll click the Build button to get some help constructing the connection string. I'll type in a shortcut to my local host, // followed by the name of the instance of SQL Server I'm going to use, SQL 2017. Now that I've done that, I can select my Movies database from the drop-down list towards the bottom of the dialog box, click OK a couple of times, and there's my data source created. I can now right-click on that and choose to add a data set. And I'll call this one Actors. It's going to be an incredibly simple data set. In fact, we're only going to select one single column. We could probably write the select statement faster than using the Query Designer. But I'm going to use the Query Designer. I'll expand the Tables folder and then the Actor table. And I'm only going to select the full name column. Just for the purposes of the video, I'm going to pretend that the first name and family name columns don't exist. The whole point of the video, of course, is to split the full name into actors' first names, last names, and possibly even middle names. So I'm just going to pretend that those existing columns aren't there, stick with the full name, click OK a couple of times, and there's the data set created. Next, I'll just create a nice symbol table to display the results. I'll get rid of the placeholder title text box and then get rid of the page footer as well. Right-click into the body of the report and choose to insert a table. I've only got one column to pick, so that's nice and easy. It's the full name. And just to avoid the text rendering bug where often all the text doesn't actually get displayed properly when you run the report, I'm just going to switch the font of all the cells in the table from the default to any other, and then just back to the default. I'll just change the column width of the full name column, and then do some basic formatting for the column headers just to make those stand out. The usual thing I always do, and then run the report just to get a list of all of the actor names. Separating out our actor names is going to require a combination of different functions, and I'd like to build things up step by step. I'm going to begin by pretending that every single actor's first name contains exactly 3 letters, and I'm going to look at how we can separate 3 letters from the beginning of each actor's name. So let's head back to the design view, and I'd like to add a new calculated field to my actors dataset. So I can right-click on the dataset name and choose Add Calculated Field. I'll call the field first 3 letters, and then I'll click the FX button to launch the expression builder, head to the Common Functions category, and then select Text. So there's a huge variety of text functions available for manipulating strings. The one we're going to use here will return characters from the left side of the string. And the function name is called left, as you can see I've selected it there. And there are 2 parameters to fill in. The first parameter is the value that contains all of the text, and the second parameter is how many letters or characters you want from the left of that string. So I'll double click the left function to insert it and open up the round brackets, and then from the fields list I'm going to insert the full name field, then type in a comma, enter the number 3, and then close the round brackets. The space there, by the way, is optional. I just write that in for readability purposes. It's not necessary. You can miss it out if you like. If I click OK and then click OK again, I can then assign the first 3 letters column to my table, And then having done that, I can give the report a quick run and find that indeed I do get the first 3 letters from each actor's name. So this would be fine, of course, if every actor had exactly 3 letters in their first name, but obviously that's not the case. So the next thing we're going to do is try to calculate the location of the character which separates the first name from the rest of the string. And that character in this example is going to be a space character. So let's head back to the design view and we'll right click on the actors dataset again and choose to add a calculated field. And I'm going to call this one space position. I can then click the FX button at the right hand side, head back to the common functions category and then the text category in there. The function which calculates the position of one string inside another in Visual Basic or Report Builder is InStr or inString. So the way this works is you specify the full string that might contain the character you're looking for, and then the character that you are looking for, or characters. You'll see that you don't have to type in just a single character here. So I'm going to double click the inString function and then head back to the fields list and insert the full name field, followed by a comma, an optional space, and then in some double quotes, the character we're looking for. So in this example, of course, we're looking for a space. So I'll type in a space, close the double quotes, and then close the round brackets. So the full expression should look like so. If I then click OK and OK again, and I'll add this new column to my table, hit the run button, and we'll see that it does calculate for us the location of the space character by counting from left to right and telling us the number that the space occupies in the string. All we need to do now is put those 2 calculations together to return the first name for each actor. I'll head back to the design view, right click the actors dataset and choose add calculated field. I'll call this one first name, and then hit the FX button at the right hand side to launch the expression builder. The first function we're going to use is the left function, so you can either type that in or select it from the text category by double clicking its name. If you're typing it in, don't forget to open the round brackets. Then I need to reference the full name field, that's where I'm getting my characters from, followed by a comma and an optional space, and then we specify the next parameter in 2 different ways. We could either insert the inString function and tell it to look for the position of a space in the full name, but as I've already calculated that and I have the value available in a field called space position, I can just insert a reference to that field. So having double clicked on the space position field, I can then close the round brackets. The final result looks like so. And then if I click OK again, and then drag the first name field into the table, when I run the report, we should see this column contains the first name of each actor. Now you might have already spotted a minor problem with this, and that's that the location of the space character isn't the same as the number of characters in somebody's first name. So of course Tom has 3 letters in it, but we've returned 4 characters from the left of Tom Cruise. That means that although we can't see it, every single actor's name here contains an extra trailing space at the right hand side. And I want to make sure that we get rid of that. I don't want to assume that that isn't there. I want to guarantee that that space is not in the first name. There's a couple of solutions to this, but if I go back to the design view, I'm going to right click the first name field, choose to view its properties, and then hit the FX button at the right hand side of that first name field. Another function in the text category that allows you to get rid of spaces wrapped around your strings. There are 3 of them actually. There's one called RTrim, which takes spaces away from the left hand side. There's one called RTrim, which takes spaces away from the right hand side, and one called just trim, which takes spaces away from both the beginning and the end of the string. In this example, all we really need to use here is the RTrim function. So let's wrap the RTrim function around the rest of our calculation. So I've inserted RTrim open round brackets in front of that, front of the existing expression, and then I need to close an extra set of round brackets at the end to enclose all of that. So having done so, I can click OK a couple of times, have a look at the report again. You won't notice any difference, but you have the satisfaction of knowing that there is no trailing spaces after your actors' first names. Now there is actually one more problem that isn't immediately apparent just from looking at the list as it's presented here, but we can quickly highlight this by changing the sort order of the table. Let's head back to the design view, and I'm going to select any cell in the table and then right click on one of the grey boxes around the outside and choose either Tablix or Tablix properties. And then if I head to the sorting page, I'm going to add a sort and sort in ascending order of space position. Once I've done that, if I click OK and then run the report, you will immediately spot the troublemakers up at the top of the list, the people who only have a single name, so Sting, Share, etc. Because they don't have a space in their name, the space position is calculated as 0. So when the InStr function can't find what you've asked it to look for, the result is 0. So we've returned 0 characters from the left of the full name. Then we've trimmed that, or RTrimmed it, to get rid of any trailing spaces for good measure. Of course, there wouldn't have been any. So we end up with an empty string as the result of the first name. Several solutions we could use to fix this, but I'm going to stick with a fairly simple one. We're going to check if the space position is 0, then we'll simply return the full name for each actor. Otherwise, we'll return everything to the left of the first space. So having done that, I'm going to head back to the design view, and then let's right click on our first name field and choose field properties. I can click the FX button at the right hand side. And what we need to do is wrap an if function around what we've done so far. You'll find the if function in the program flow category of common functions, so you can either type it in or you can insert it by double clicking it. I want to insert the if function just after the equal sign before the RTrim. So I'm going to double click the if function to insert it. Now I want to check if the value of the space position field is 0. So I can head back to the fields list and double click space position and then type in equals 0 to ask if the value of that column is equal to 0. Again, the spaces either side of that are optional, but I like to type them in for readability purposes. If I then type in a comma after the 0, I can insert the full name field. So if there is no space in the name, then insert the full name and add another comma. If there is a space to be found, then return everything to the left of the space. I'll need to close an extra set of round brackets at the end, and I'm going to tidy this up by writing these different parameters on separate lines. So the first parameter is a logical test, what I'm asking for, or what question I'm asking. The second parameter is what to return if the answer of that logical test is true. And then the third thing is what to return if that logical test is false. So that, I think, makes it a little easier to read. That's what the full result should look like. Having done that, let's click OK a couple of times, run the report once more, and we should now see that everybody has a first name, regardless of whether there's a space in their name or not. Now, everything we've done here in Visual Basic in Report Builder, we could have also done in the underlying SQL statement of our query. So just to demonstrate how that would work, let's head back to the design view, and I'm going to right click my actors dataset and choose dataset properties this time. I'm going to add a new column to my select list, so I'm going to hit enter to give myself a new line above the from clause, give myself a couple of spaces, and then begin my new column definition with a comma. The first thing I'll do is calculate the position of a space in the actor's full name. SQL doesn't have an InStr or an InStr function. It has an equivalent, but it's called char or char index. So the char index function looks like so, char index, open some round brackets. So as well as the name of the function being different, the order of the parameters is different. With InStr, you refer to the full string of text, followed by what you're looking for. In char index, it's the opposite way round. I need to state what I'm looking for, and what I'm looking for is a space character. And because I'm in SQL, of course, I need to enter that string in single quotes rather than double quotes. Then I can type in a comma, and I can specify then the full string of text which might contain that character. I'm going to copy and paste the actor full name, close the round brackets, and then I'll add an alias. I'll call it as first name 2. And then just to demonstrate that it still works, I'm going to hit OK and then drag the first name 2 field into my table and then run the report just so that you can see that that does the same thing effectively as the InStr function does. So now we want to get this number of characters from the left of the actor's full name, and the function which does that in SQL is actually the same name as the one in Visual Basic. It's called left. So let's head back to the design view, and I can right-click the actors dataset and choose dataset properties. Now I'm going to wrap the left function around the char index function, so I'll say left, open some round brackets, and then I want to reference the actor's full name, so I can copy and paste that, and then type in a comma and say char index, and I just need to make sure that I've closed an extra set of round brackets at the end of that expression. The big problem with SQL expressions is that you can't reference a previously created column in the same select list. You have to nest all of your expressions together, so all the functions need to be nested inside. So that's what this should look like. Left, actor.fullname, followed by a comma, char index, looking for a space in the actor full name. Once I've done that, let's zoom back out again, click OK, run the report, and I'm at the stage now again where I was previously, where I've got the first name for everyone who has a space in their name. So we have two more problems to solve with the SQL version. The first is to make sure that we get rid of any trailing spaces that might be after the person's first name. That's nice and easy. The function which does that in SQL is the same. It's called RTrim. And then we need to make sure that we return a full name for anybody who does not have a space in their name. And again, we can do that using the if function in SQL. So let's head back to the design view and right-click the actors dataset, choose dataset properties. I'll start by wrapping the RTrim function around the current expression. So just after the comma on this line, I'm going to say RTrim, and then open some round brackets. SQL Server does have an LTrim function as well, and if you're working in SQL Server 2017 or later, there's also a generic trim function. That's only from SQL Server 2017. So RTrim, open some round brackets, and I just need to make sure that I've closed the round brackets at the end just before my alias. Okay, then I'm going to add the if function as well. So just in front of RTrim, I'm going to check by typing in the if function, IIf, open some round brackets, and then I'm just going to move the rest of that calculation down to the next line and type in a few spaces in front of it just to indent it. So the condition I'm testing for is whether or not the char index function returns 0. And again, annoyingly, that means that I have to replicate the char index function. So I'm just going to copy and paste it rather than typing it in again. So I'll copy char index. I'm going to put that on the line just below if with a few spaces in front of it, just to try to tidy up the layout a little bit. So if the char index of a space in the actor's full name equals 0, on the next line, I'll type in a few spaces, followed by a comma. And if there is no space in the actor's full name, then I simply want to return the actor's full name. So again, some copying and pasting. I then need to add an extra comma before the RTrim function. So I'm separating out the 3 parameters of the if function here. And then finally, because I've opened some new round brackets in front of if, I just need to make sure I've closed those at the end of the expression as well. It's a bit of an awkward thing to do when you're just typing your expressions directly into a plain text box. But yeah, so there we go. There's how the function should look. Having done this, if I go back and then click OK, and then simply run the report one more time, there we go. We've successfully calculated the first name for actors using both Visual Basic and SQL. Now let's start calculating the last name of each actor. This is complicated slightly by some of the actors who have multiple names in the string. So we've got F. Murray Abraham, J.K. Simmons, etc. and they have 2 spaces in their names. We want to make sure that we find the location of the final space in the full name of each actor. So let's look at how we can do that first of all. Let's head back to the design view, and I'm going to right-click the actors dataset and add a calculated field. And I'll call this one last space position. And then click the FX button on the right-hand side, head back to the Common Functions text category, and then just below InStr is InStr rev, or instring reverse. It does the same thing as the instring function. It just starts looking from the right-hand side of the string to find the first instance of the character you're looking for, working from right to left. So I'm going to insert the instring function, and I'm going to say that I'm looking inside the full name of each actor. And what I'm looking for, once again, is a space character. So nice and simple, InStr rev. If I then click OK a couple of times, I'm going to tidy up my table. I'm going to get rid of the first 3 letters column and the first name to column. I don't think we really need to see those at this point. And I'll drag last space position into the table at the end, hit the run button, and we should be able to see now, again, we've got the location of the last space in each person's name. So for people who have only one single space, the location of the first and the last will be the same. For people who have multiple spaces, the position of the first and the last will be different. To get the last name of each person then, I can say get every character from the one that is one space to the right of the location of the last space, all the way through to the end of the string. To do that, I'm going to go back to the design view and add a new calculated field. And I'm going to call this one last name, and then click the FX button. And I'm going to look for a function in the text category called mid. So the mid function allows us to get characters from somewhere in the middle of a string for a specified number of characters after that. The third parameter, there are 3 parameters altogether, I should say. The first one is the full string of text. The second parameter is the position you want to start at. And the third parameter is how many characters to get from that location onwards. We can actually omit the third parameter just to get everything to the very end of the string, and that's what we're going to do. So let's insert the mid function and then go back to the fields list and insert the full name field, followed by a comma, and then insert the last space position. And because I want to avoid getting the space that we're currently on, I'm going to add 1 to the value of the last space position. So that means we don't have to trim it at the end. If I then close the round brackets, and then that's what the full expression should look like. We can click OK a couple of times, add the last name field to the table, run the report, and there we go. We've got everybody's last name. Now, we got the opposite problem that we had previously with our actors with only a single name. The last space position is 0. I told the last name column to get everything from the character 1 to the right of that, so we've added 1. So from character number 1, get every character to the end of the string. I actually want to do the opposite here. I want to avoid getting any last name. I don't want people called Sting Sting and Flea Flea. That just sounds silly, even sillier than calling yourself Flea, for instance. But let's get rid of that. So let's use the if function to do the same thing we did earlier on with the first name, but this time we'll return an empty string if there is no space in the actor's full name. So I'm going to right-click my last name field and choose to view its properties, hit the FX button at the right-hand side, and then insert an if function just after the equals operator. So I'm going to check if. I can then check either the last space position or the space position field. It doesn't really matter, either will do. I'll insert space position, check if that is equal to 0, followed by a comma. And if that's true, I want to return an empty string, so double quotes with nothing inside. I could also, by the way, in Visual Basic, I could tell it to return nothing. So I could use the word nothing to return effectively a null. But I'm going to return an empty string for this particular example. So double quotes, followed by a comma, and then assuming there is a space in the name, I'll do that calculation using the mid function. I'll close the round brackets at the end and then just neaten up the layout here by taking each parameter down to the next line, typing in a few spaces at the beginning to indent them, and then that's what the full expression should look like. So having done that, I can click OK a couple of times, run the report again, and now I've got people with only a single name have their single name in the first name column and nothing in the last name column. People with a first and a last name have first in the first and last in the last. Now we can do the same thing in SQL, although it's made a little trickier in SQL because there's no equivalent of the InStr reverse function. All we have is the char index function, which always counts from left to right to locate the string you're looking for. So what we're going to do to start with is we're going to change the order of the characters in the string. We're going to reverse them. And there's a function handily that will do that for us. So let's have a look at how that works first. If we head back to the design view, I'm going to right-click the actors dataset and choose to view dataset properties. Then in my select list, I'm going to give myself a new line above my from clause, type in a couple of spaces followed by a comma, and then the name of the function is called reverse. There's a single parameter, which is the string you're trying to change the order of the characters of. So I'm going to open some round brackets and then copy and paste my actor full name field into there. Close the round brackets and then say as, I'll call it last name 2. And then I can click OK. I'm going to drag the last name 2 column into the table and then hit the run button. And we'll see that all this does to start with is changes the order of the characters in the string. It reverses them, as you might expect. So now what we can do is we can use the char index function to find the location of the first space in the reversed version of that string. And what that will do effectively is it will tell us how many characters there are in somebody's last name, plus 1. Of course, it's going to include the space there, but that's okay. So let's head back to the design view, and then I'm going to go back to the dataset properties of actors, and then I'm going to simply wrap the char index function around the reverse function. So I'm going to say char index, open some round brackets. Oops, I've not spelled char index correctly. Excuse me, char index. And then inside the round brackets, I'm looking for a space character. So in some single quotes, type in a space, followed by a comma. And I'm looking for the space in the reversed version of the actor's full name. If I then close the round brackets after the reverse full name to have a corresponding close bracket for the one I've just opened, if I then click OK and then run the report, we'll see this time it tells us effectively how many characters there are in the last name. Of course, it's 1 more than that, but as I say, that's okay. We can trim the extra space off in a moment. Now I want to get a number of characters from the right-hand side of this full name that is equivalent to the number returned by that char index function. So I now need to nest the current expression inside a function which returns characters from the right of a string. Back to the design view, I'm going to right-click my actors dataset and choose dataset properties. Just in front of the char index function, I'm going to insert a function called right. So right works in fundamentally the same way as the left function does. It just takes characters from the right-hand side of the text rather than the left. So I'm going to say from the right of the actor's full name. So again, I can copy and paste actor full name. So right, open brackets, actor.fullname, followed by a comma, and then from the char index to return the correct number of characters. Just going to close an extra set of round brackets after that and just try to neaten things up a little bit by taking these parameters down to different lines. So actor full name on one line and then the char index function down on the next line. So that's what that should look like so far. If I zoom out again and click OK and then run the report again, I'll see I'm getting to the stage now where I'm getting the actors' last names. It isn't easy to see again, but I do indeed have an extra space at the beginning of those strings. So what I'd like to do is make sure I've removed those, and I can do that with a trim function or an RTrim function. So one last modification, if I head back to the design view, right-click my dataset and choose dataset properties, and then just in front of the right function, if you're working in SQL Server 2017, you could use a trim function. Otherwise, I can use the RTrim function to get rid of the left space, or the leading space. So RTrim, open some round brackets, and of course I need to close one more set of round brackets at the end of the expression to go along with the one that I've just opened. So that's what the entire expression should look like. The nice thing here is we don't have to check if we're returning the full name. So you probably spotted already that we didn't get the last name for anybody who has no space in their name. So the char index function, if it can't find a space, returns 0. So we're returning 0 characters from the right of the actor's full name when there is no space in their name. So that's perfect. We've got less work to do at this point at least. So a final run of that one, and it's not obvious, not easy to spot, but we have removed the leading space from the last name there. The last thing we'll try to do is get the middle name for all the actors who have them. The approach we'll take is going to use the mid function again. So what we're going to do, if we take for example F. Murray Abraham, we're going to use the mid function to get characters from the full name, and we're going to start at one character after the location of the first space. So we'll start at character number 4 for F. Murray Abraham. If we missed out the last parameter, the third parameter of the mid function, it will return every character to the end of the string, so I'd get Murray Abraham. What I want to do is return a number of characters that is equal to the location of the last space minus the location of the first. So if I do 10 minus 3, that gives me 7. And if I count 7 characters, M-U-R-R-A-Y space, I'll get that chunk of text, the second name, and the final space there as well. Finally, we can just trim off that final space, and I'll get the person's middle name. Nicely, if somebody does not have a middle name, the way we're going to calculate the length of the middle name is by subtracting the space position from the last space position. So for Ed Harris, if I do 3 minus 3, that will return 0 characters from the middle of his name. So we'll end up with an empty string. So it will automatically exclude people who don't have a middle name. So let's have a quick look at how that works. Back in the design view, I'll right click on the actors dataset and choose add calculated field. And I'll call this one middle name. And then I'll click the FX button to launch the expression builder. I'll go to the common functions category and go for text and insert the mid function first. I then want to specify that I'm getting characters from the full name of the actor, followed by a comma. And then the starting position is the location of the space position plus 1. Follow that with another comma, and then the number of characters I want to return is equal to the last space position minus the space position. If I then close the round brackets and just tidy this up a little bit, if I can take the various parameters down to different lines so you can see this hopefully a little more clearly. And I've just missed one there, excuse me. And then the only other thing we were going to do is trim off the final space that we've included. So again, I can do that with an RTrim function. So I'll wrap an RTrim around the mid function. So just after the equal sign, RTrim open round brackets, and then close a set of round brackets right at the end. So the final result looks like this. So that's relatively straightforward. If I click OK a couple of times and then drag the middle name field into my table, and then run the report, and I'll end up with Murray, K, Knight, Lee, but for people who don't have a middle name, I'll return nothing. Doing the same thing in SQL is made a little trickier just because we can't reference a previously calculated field, but it's still possible, so let's have a look. What I'm going to do first is separate out everything after the first space. So we're going to get every character from the one after the first space all the way through to the end of the string. So the equivalent of the mid function in Visual Basic, in SQL we have a function called SubString. So back in the design view, let's right click the actors dataset and choose to view its properties. And I'll add a new column above my from clause, starting with a comma and then the name of the function SubString. The SubString function starts by referring to the column containing all of the text, so I'll go for the actor's full name, copy and paste that. Then I can say which character I'd like to begin getting my characters from. So to do that, I'm going to copy my char index function, the initial char index function that looks for a space in the actor's full name. So I'm going to copy that and paste it just after the comma. And then I want to begin one character after that, so I can say +1. Now, if this was the same as the mid function, we could close the round brackets there, and that would automatically get every character to the end of the string. But sadly, in the SubString function in SQL, the third parameter isn't optional. You always have to say how many characters you want to get. Now, we could calculate how many characters remain in the string after the first space, but it's far, far easier to just overestimate how many characters there are. So you could do something really, really basic, like type in a comma and then type in a big number, like 999. To be a little cleverer about things, we can calculate the length of the actor's full name. So if I use the function called len, L-E-N, open up some round brackets, and then copy and paste the actor's full name inside there again, close two sets of round brackets, one for len, and one for the substring function. I can then give that an alias, and I'll call it as middle name. It won't quite be the middle name yet. In fact, I'll call it middle name 2. And then if I just show you what that looks like, if I click OK, and then add the middle name 2 field to the table. And in fact, let me just tidy up a little bit here again. Let me get rid of the last name 2 column as well. So if I run the report at that stage, we'll end up with everything after the first space through to the end of the string. We're getting the full name or the first name for our actors who don't have a space in their name, of course, because we've calculated 0 for the char index of the space. Then we've added 1 to that, and then we've said return everything to the end of the string. So we'll sort that out a little bit later on. The important thing is here we've got the middle name and the last name. The next step is to calculate the location of the first space in the remaining text. So it's easy to do for RTrim. If I count 1, 2, 3, 4, I'll locate the position of the first space in the remaining text. And then from there, it's just a case of returning everything to the left of that. So let's add in the char index function to get the location of the space in the remaining text. If I head back to the design view, right-click Actors and choose Dataset Properties. It probably makes sense to start separating this onto multiple different lines here. So in fact, let's just tidy up a little bit first. I'm going to take the actor full name. So the first value we passed into the substring function, I'm going to take down to the next line. And then the char index function, I'm going to take that down to the next line. And then finally, the len function, I'm going to take that down to the next line as well. So at this point, the entire expression looks like so. Now I'm going to wrap the char index function around the substring function. So just in front of substring, after the comma, I'm going to type in char index, open some round brackets. I'm looking for a space followed by a comma, and then the substring function, I'm just going to take that down to the next line here as well. Okay. I need to close an extra set of round brackets then, of course, right at the very end of the expression. So the final thing at this stage should look like so. Now all this is going to do, of course, is return the number of the number of the location of the first space in the remaining name. So let's click OK, have a quick run, and then I should see, for example, for RTrim, it's counting 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's exactly what I get. For F. Murray Abraham, it's counting from the M to the space, and that's 7. So the next stage is to get everything to the left of the location of that character. Let's head back to the design view again and extend this expression even more. I can right-click on Actors and choose Dataset Properties. And then let's see, what do we need to do? Well, we need to add a left function just in front of the char index. So after the comma, I'm going to say left, open some round brackets, and then I'm going to take the char index function down a couple of lines and type in a comma in front of its name. So Everything from the char index function onwards is purely to calculate the location of the space in the remaining text after we've separated off the first name. I'm going to take the opportunity to close an extra set of round brackets at the end there, as I've just opened up a new one for the left function. The first thing we need to say then for the left function, the first parameter we need to fill in is what text are we trying to get characters from the left of. And that's awkward because that means we've got to basically reproduce this calculation, which takes a substring from the actor's full name, starting one character after the location of the first space, all the way through to the end of that string. So I'm going to copy from the SubString function all the way down to the end of the len, and then carefully count the number of round brackets I need. So it's going to be 1 for the len function, and then 1 more for the substring function. So 2 sets of closed round brackets there. So I'm going to copy that and then paste that in as the first parameter of my left function. Who thinks this is going to work first time? Let's give it a try. Let's click OK. Run the report. And then we'll end up with a middle name for each person who has one. Of course, yeah, people who don't have a middle name won't return anything. It's one tiny last little thing we should do just for the sake of completeness and to satisfy my own tendencies. I want to make sure there's no extra space at the end. So I've returned 4 characters for our Lee Ermi, so I've got my extra space. So I want to trim or RTrim the entire result. Back to the design view, I'm going to right-click the actors dataset and dataset properties. Just in front of the left function, I'm going to type in RTrim, open some round brackets, and then at the very end of that entire thing, just before the alias, I'll close the extra set of round brackets. It's horrendous to try to do this without any help whatsoever in this plain text box, but it is possible, and there we go. That's calculating the middle name. Let's just tidy things up a little bit. If I click OK, then I'm just going to change, in fact, I'm going to take away all the columns except for first name and middle name 2. I'm going to select and delete all of those. Then I'm going to drag in the first name 2. I've got middle name 2 and then last name 2. So let's just change the column widths and make sure that when we run the entire thing, we end up with separated out first, middle and last name columns for every actor in the list. Phew. Quite a bit of effort to do that sort of thing, and hopefully you get your data presented to you already separated out into first, middle and last names. If not, at least we know now that we can separate them out using some combinations of functions. So hopefully you'll find some of those things useful. Thanks for watching. See you next time.